Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this week's Friday Reads, where I discuss everything that I have read in the last week, as well as talk about the things that I'm currently reading, and then also look ahead to what I might be getting to in the next week. And this week we have a ton of things to talk about because I am having an amazing week of reading. So let's just dive right in. First up, A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent by Marie Brennan. So this is the first book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, which is adult fantasy. And essentially we're following our main character of Isabella, who is later known as Lady Trent. And we're following her as she kind of discovers her passion for dragons and then goes on her very first scientific expedition. And I really liked this book. So one thing I really appreciated is we spent a lot of our world building time on the dragons because Isabella is trying to study them, right? And so we get to discover things as she discovers things. And I really, really enjoyed that aspect. I'm finding that I really like following scientist characters as they're making scientific discoveries. I don't know why, but that really does it for me. Because we're spending so much time on the dragons, we don't have a ton of time for everything else, but it does feel very Victorian-esque, even though we are in a completely different world. We're not on Earth, but it does feel very Victorian-esque. And so it didn't really fall apart or anything. Like, I didn't feel like I needed more world building, and I was really happy to kind of focus so heavily on the dragons. And I really liked Isabella as a character. Like, she's definitely very young in this. She's like, you know, she's very headstrong and it's like very stubborn, and she thinks she knows best and everything, but it's also fascinating because she's also very determined to like find a place for herself in the scientific community where she can study dragons, because they very much do not want a woman doing this. And like, it's fascinating to me to watch her kind of shift how she thinks about it and what she thinks like her place may be as she kind of expands the possibilities. It was just, I don't know, it was really fun to watch that. I especially love that this is a memoir, so it is being written by Isabella, Lady Trent, in the future. And so the narrator is Lady Trent looking back on these exploits from decades earlier. And I love the little interjections that we get from her because they're very frequently insightful, and honestly, they're so funny half the time. So I just really adored that aspect to this book. Now, the plot of it, I didn't really know what to expect going in other than like scientific expedition eventually. And that's true. And there's also more of a mystery to it than I kind of really expected. But what I will say is I did not know where we were going pretty much ever. But I also didn't mind. I was completely along for the ride, and I really enjoyed how it wrapped up. And I also really loved how we ended it in such a way that it feels nice. It's a nice ending, but it also very definitely sets up for the next books. So yeah, I mean, I really liked this. I think the only thing that I didn't like was the writing style, which is that more like stiff, formal kind of writing style you get from like older books or like steampunk books, which doesn't generally work for me. It fit this book, but I didn't like it. So that was the only thing that kept me from absolutely adoring it. I did give this 4.5 stars. I have every intention of continuing on with this series. And then I picked up 3 more volumes of Lumberjanes. So that is volume 4, which is Out of Time, volume 5, which is Band Together, and volume 6, which is Sink or Swim. And essentially, if you don't know, Lumberjanes is this elementary school graphic novel series where we're following these 5 girls at Lumberjanes camp, which is like a type of scouting camp. And honestly, there's something weird going on in this camp because these girls keep running into all kinds of supernatural things. And the same with the first 3 volumes, there are things about it that I really liked. I really loved these characters. These girls are great. I like that they're different enough. Like, they are very different from each other. But they frequently try to play to their strengths. I love that they're friends, but that doesn't mean it's a frictionless friendship. They do occasionally have to be like, yeah, you hurt my feelings. So I like that they kind of work that out on page. I do think that the things, like the plot lines, the hijinks they get up to are interesting. But what I said at the last week is that I'm not really like the wacky hijinks kind of person. I can handle it if there's an overarching plot. But unfortunately, I'm finding that this really just doesn't have an overarching plot. There are definitely things that are pushing a narrative forward. Like, I feel like eventually we're going to figure out why this camp has so many weird things happening. But like, it doesn't really feel like we're setting up for an overarching plot, that it really is mostly just those wacky hijinks, which, like, they're fun, but they're not really for me. I am definitely not the intended audience on these books, and I think the intended audience would enjoy these a lot more than I do, even though, again, I don't think they're bad. So yeah, I read these three. I'm glad that I continued on, but I think that I am pretty much done with this graphic novel series. So if you're curious, I gave volume 4 3.5 stars, and volume 5 3.5 stars, and volume 6 3 stars. And that is where I am going to end my Lumberjanes journey. So moving into the next thing, that is The Binding by Bridget Collins. This is an adult novel, and it's been described as like a fantasy. I have some disagreements with that. We'll get into that. But essentially, we're following our main character. I don't even know his name. And he is chosen to be an apprentice to the bookbinder. The bookbinder makes these books, and through some kind of magical something, people can come to the bookbinder and I don't know if it's like say their memory out loud, or I don't know how it works, but essentially the book will write down their memory, and then they don't have that memory anymore, so they don't have to live with it. And so this kid is getting apprenticed to the bookbinder. And that was the whole premise. That is basically what the description says. Now, if it's not entirely clear, I did not like this. So I actually DNF'd it after 18 pages. I read 18 pages and said, nope, I am out. So first off, this is historical. And there was nothing in the description that said that it was going to be historical. If I had to guess, I'd put this probably early 1900s, like 1910, maybe 1920. Because they're definitely talking about things like medicine shows. So it might even be earlier than that, but I'm not entirely certain. But like, so this is in England, by the way, like Britain, I think England specifically, in like the 1900s. So it's historical, which I don't generally like historical. And then I really struggled with the writing style of this. It wasn't like how the sentences were put together. It was more how the author was choosing to give us the information, where like I think they were trying to be coy with like trying to set up a mystery about some of these things. And I'm like, oh, I don't care. I'm really just, I'm out. Either tell me or don't, right? It was just not well done. And so I didn't love that. I went and looked at Goodreads. This is what I do. If I am not loving something, I will go to Goodreads and see what people say, especially in the 2 and 3 star range, just to see, like, is it going to get better? And what I found out from that is actually this is a romance. And I was just like, oh, it's a historical romance. Like, what happened to our fantasy aspects? And apparently it's not even truly fantasy. I think that, like, I'm not as familiar with the genres, but from what I read, it sounds like it might be more magical realism, which I was just like, oh no, that's not what I wanted at all. I wanted a fantasy. And also, I will say one of the things that people were talking about the romance, especially those that did not like it, they kind of said it was kind of like a sad boy romance. Our main character is just a sad boy. And so, like, everything that was said about the romance, I was like, I'm not going to like this romance. Okay, so about the fantasy, are we going to get into, like, the magic and how it works? no, not really. It's a historical setting. And I was just like, I'm so done with this. I feel like I was misled as to what this book was going to be. So I DNF'd it. And then I went ahead and picked up Iron Widow by Shirin J. Zhao. So this is the first book in a YA fantasy sci-fi blend kind of story. I don't remember the name of the series, but essentially we are following our main character of Zetian. That's what I'm going to say. I'm not sure if it's correct. I apologize. If you have the pronunciation, I would love to have it. But essentially, she lives in a world where there are these creatures that attack humans, essentially. And they have these creatures are kind of made out of this, what they call spirit metal. And humans are able to take those husks, that spirit metal, and create these mecha, basically, and that humans can then use their own chi to power. And there are two pilots. There's the primary pilot and then the co-pilot. The primary pilot is always a boy, and the co-pilot is also called a concubine pilot, is always a girl. And frequently the girls die. It's a very patriarchal kind of society. Anyway, our main character of Zetian decides that she is going to sign up to be a concubine pilot so that she can get close to the primary pilot that murdered her sister. And the story goes from there. And here's the deal. I loved this so much that I am incredibly biased. So I can't tell you the bad parts about this because I don't see them, because I connected with this so fully. So our main character is pretty angry at the patriarchy of her society. And that resonated with me really well. And I think that the author did a really great job balancing out Zetian's anger and trying to accomplish her mission and what the system allows her to do, and how she can hit back. And this is a very morally gray character. She is not a good person. And it was one of the very few that I've ever run into where I actually really liked it. I really liked how she kind of navigated the various problems that she encounters and how she's going to continue forward. And I really like this. I like this character. I liked this plot. I'm very interested to see where we're going to go next. I know that's not necessarily the best review of this, but again, I'm completely biased. I love this. What I found is that, honestly, it kind of gave voice to this simmering rage that I have felt about all of the different systems of inequality that we have in place. And it was really nice to see it on page. I don't think that this is necessarily going to be for everyone. I do think that for some people, it's going to be too much. It's going to be too angry. It's going to be too much of how much men suck, but yes, that's kind of how the patriarchy is. So I don't know. I found it to be fairly realistic, but I think that not everybody is going to love it nearly as much as I did. But I ended up giving this 5 stars. And then we're almost done. But then I picked up 2 volumes of another graphic novel series, this one being the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series, the reboot done by Jordi Belair. So I picked up the first one, which is High School is Hell, and the second one, which is Once Bitten. And I have some very mixed feelings on these. So what I will say is I think that the art inside was done really well. This is a modernization of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So it's basically taking that first TV series and the first season and kind of rebooting it, modernizing it, and putting it in comic book form. And I think that the art was really nice, actually. I really love that for every single character, it's almost like a stylized version of each of the actors. And so sometimes you look at them and you're like, oh no, I can totally tell that that's Sarah Michelle Gellar, for instance. I can tell that that's Sarah Michelle Gellar, and but it doesn't look exactly like her. And so I think that that was done really, really well. I think that mostly they did okay on the characters, except there were some characters that I think they were trash about. So, like, it's a mixed bag. So, like, I think Buffy was great. Xander was definitely Xander. But there was, like, Cordelia, who, if you don't know, in this show, was she's just straight up mean girl. Like she would constantly say things where you're like, wow, do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? And it was funny most of the time. Now looking back now, it's definitely like more problematic, but it was mostly funny. But like who she is in these two books, well, she only appears in the first volume. She's just like this happy, bubbly, like cheerful person who is just kind. And I'm like, what happened to my Cordelia? Like, yes, she was mean, but she kind of mellows out. And one of the things that I really appreciate is she's incredibly insightful and she cuts to the core of what people are talking about in this way that's just like very lovely. And so I was very upset to kind of see her character mangled in this. Um, Likewise, like Spike is also a really great character in the series, in the TV show, but in this, he's just kind of reduced to a lackey. Like, there was definitely some choices made that I don't really agree with for the characters. What I will say about the modernization aspect of it, I do think it really feels like modern day, which is great because if you go back and watch the original TV show, it's very dated. So this definitely was done, like the modernization aspect of this was done well. The plot of both of these were like nothing. Honestly, I don't remember. I read these this week and I'm losing details about the plot already because it was just there. It really wasn't much of anything at all. But I think that the biggest problem that I have with these is that they don't retain the feel of the TV show. It's just like part of what made these characters so great is that they were very different, but they somewhat slowly came together to become good friends and then battle the forces of evil. And it was so fast in this like the first volume, they're already like, yeah, we trust you and we're going to go fight vampires with you. And like the characters weren't differentiated enough. And so it was just very strange. It just did not feel right to me. And so for me, this didn't quite work. Like I think some aspects of it were pretty good, but mostly it was just a swing and a miss. And so I ended up giving both of volumes of this 3 stars, and I'm not going to continue on because it just didn't really work for me. Pretty much. I mean, like, it wasn't bad, but it also just really wasn't good. And then the last thing, the last one, I also read The Deep by Rivers Solomon. So this is an adult horror fantasy novella where we are following our main character of Yetu. Yetu is a Wajinru. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I apologize if I'm mangling it. But basically a mermaid. And these mermaids come from their origin story is that they started as the unborn children of the pregnant slaves who were thrown overboard, like killed and thrown overboard, as on, like they were thrown from the ships that were taking these slaves to America, essentially. So the unborn children kind of became the Wajinru, or mermaids. And so Yetu is the historian for her people, and essentially the historian is the keeper of all of the memories of these people. The rest of the mermaids do not remember much of anything at all. And so it's the historian's job to remember everything, every single bit of horror and trauma in their past. And so Yetu is that historian, and she is not doing well with it, and she kind of dreams of a different life. And it kind of goes from there. I'm trying really hard to be very like circumspect about how I describe this because it is a novella, so I don't want to give anything away. And here's what I'll say. I liked this. I liked the topic of discussion, which is essentially like, how do you balance out remembering the past with not living in the past? How do you balance out, like, I think that like history is so important, and remembering the past is so important, but how do you deal with it when it's this big trauma that it's generational trauma, and how do we handle this, right? I think that those are some of the big questions that are being asked in this, and I think that discussion is very, very interesting. The thing that I did not necessarily love is the writing style. The writing style was very, very difficult for me. What I'm finding is that there's basically 3 writing styles, like categories of writing style for me. I like it, I specifically dislike it, or number 3, it's just hard for me to read, and so I'm having to put so much work into it that I'm almost resentful of it. This book fell in that last category. And the problem is that, like, because I'm having to put in extra work to understand what is being said, I never can fully dive into the story. Like, I can't get immersed in the story because, like, I am so aware of how much work I'm having to put into it. This wasn't a ton of work, but it was just enough that I was, like, not really happy with it. And the story itself, like, eventually we got to a point and I'm like, oh, I know exactly where we're going with this, which sometimes is totally fine. In this case, I didn't appreciate it, but I think that might be because I was, like, a little bit at a distance from this story. If I had been more immersed, I think it would have been fine. So I think this is more of a me problem than a book problem. But generally, I think that it's a good book that just didn't quite work for me for my own personal reasons. But I'm glad that it exists out in the world. I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. So there we go. That is everything I read this week, which is absolutely bonkers. This is so much stuff. I completely forget that, like, February, I just don't have anything to do. Like, I'm not going outside because it's, like, cold and gross, and there's not a ton, just generally not a ton going on. So, like, I do my chores, I take care of the stuff that I need to take care of, and I read, and that's a lot of what I do. And because of that, I am just, like, getting through so many books. I don't necessarily think this is going to continue. I will say that. I am trying to look to do other things. So I've been listening to podcasts, primarily, like, making my way through season 4 of The Bright Sessions. I have a review for season 3 coming. It's probably not going to be up until March, though. But I am getting through season 4, which has been really interesting. I've been listening to How to Save a Planet, which is also, I highly recommend that one. As well as my husband and I are actually listening to Maintenance Phase together. This is his first time through, so it's been fascinating to, like, listen to it kind of from that, like, new perspective. So that's been really fun. I haven't really been watching anything because I just don't generally watch a ton of anything. Nothing has been calling to me. But what I've been doing is a lot of knitting too. So I'm going to show you my project. So I do a lot of scrap blankets where I literally take, like, the scrap bits of yarn that other people, you know, from like the end of other people's projects where they're like, I don't need this anymore. I had a bunch of it, but also people have given theirs to me over the years, and I make blankets. And so here we go. Like, this is what I'm working on right now. This is a scrap blanket for my younger child because his old one is too small for him. So he's the one picking out the colors. That's why they're kind of, like, a little all over the place. But he's picking out all the colors and the order and everything. I am only messing with it a little bit to make it a little bit more balanced. But yeah, and it's been really fun. And, like, I am excited because, like, this is going to, I was worried that this was going to end up taking a really long time because I wasn't going to find enough time to actually knit. But this has been especially because I'm listening to podcasts. This is kind of what I do when I listen to podcasts. So I'll probably update you guys as like I continue on with this knitting project, but I did just want to show that because that's a lot of what I'm doing too. Also, I got some books in. I made my first book order of the year, and so this is what I got. So these are all the rest of the Innkeeper Chronicles by Ilona Andrews. So that's Sweep and Peace, One Fell Sweep, Sweep of the Blade, and then the novella Sweep with Me. So I can now get completely caught up on this series. I am very excited for this. And then I also picked up The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty because apparently, like, since I finished Priory of the Orange Tree, I needed to have another chunky fantasy on my TBR for whenever I'm ready for it. I don't know when that's going to be because over 500 pages, that's a lot. So moving into what am I going to read next week? Well, I haven't started anything. That's why I'm like not telling you what I'm in the middle of. Because I literally finished The Deep like an hour ago. But what I am going to pick up next is Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. This is like young adult superhero kind of novels. This is going to be the first thing, and then I will probably pick up Sweep and Peace by Ilona Andrews. If my hold ever comes in for The Black God's Drums by P. Jelly Clark, I will pick that one up. But other than that, I'm not entirely certain what I'm going to be getting to next week. But that is it. That's everything. We got through it, y'all. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about anything that I mentioned in this Friday Reads video, or if you want to let me know what you have read, are reading, will read soon, let me know in a comment down below. But that is all I have for this video. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!